Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our Cambridge Maths for New South Wales webinar today. My name is Christine Devine and I am the New South Wales Sales Manager. Before we make a start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are gathered and pay our respects to the elders, both past and present. You can ask any questions throughout the webinar in the Q&A box, and you will see that at the bottom of your screen. There will be time for questions at the end of the webinar. Our presenters today are Stuart Palmer and Scott Halligan. Stuart Palmer is very well known throughout the state for the professional learning workshops he delivers, both metro and regional. Stuart also assists thousands of Year 12 students every year as they prepare for the HSC examinations. In addition, he has spent more than a decade running tutorials for pre-service mathematics teachers. Thank you, Stuart. Also joining us is Scott Halligan, who is our senior maths publisher at Cambridge, and Scott will be speaking later in the presentation. So I'll hand over to Stuart. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. I'm going to be talking about the books which have covers on the screen. So we're publishing 6 new books. And in addition, I also want to just make sure that you realise that our Gold series still exists. We are not revising that series at the moment, but they are still available. So just in case you've come to the party a little bit late, the biggest change in this new syllabus is stage 5. Instead of having 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, NESA has opted to go with an option that is a core. There are core topics and there are path topics. And as you can see, some of the path topics are earmarked as being good for students who are heading towards standard in Year 11 and 12, whereas others, a long list, are earmarked for students who are heading towards advanced. And then there are also a few that are for students who are heading towards extension. This is the biggest change, and I'll be talking about this a lot. So we have a book for Year 9 and Year 10, which contains all of the core topics and all of the path topics which are identified for students who are heading towards standard. Some of those path topics are in the Year 9 book. The majority of them are in the Year 10 book. I would have to say here that those 2 books are a little bit bigger than the old 5.1, 5.2. That there's a few things in the path topics that were not part of 5.2, namely standard deviation and surface area and volume of some of the shapes and solids. The biggest thing about these books is the lack of algebra. And for this reason, it would almost be impossible. In fact, I would say it is impossible for a student to use these books alone and then progress from those books into Year 11 advanced. There is just not enough algebra in the path topics for standard, and the algebra in the core is very light on. In fact, if you've been around long enough to remember the old advanced intermediate days in Year 9 and 10, the intermediate course, the algebra in this model is significantly less than what the intermediate students used to do. So, to be a little provocative, I actually think we should be seeking consent before putting students on a pathway where they are only doing the core, either with or without some path topics for standard. I actually think we should be seeking consent from parents before that happens, because this is basically closing doors in Year 11 and 12 and university STEM degrees and STEM careers of the future. So keep that in mind, please. On the other hand, these books contain everything that used to be in 5.1, 5.2 and 5.3. So as you can see, in the path topics for standard, there was very little algebra. In the path topics for advanced and extension, there's lots of algebra, so much so, in fact, that you would really struggle to get through it all. We need to be very, very selective about choosing these, and I will talk some more about that. I've been out and about for the last 6 months. It's been great now that COVID has somewhat gone away. I've been out and about meeting teachers face to face. It's been fantastic. I've been all over New South Wales, including Broken Hill, where I ran professional learning for every maths teacher in Broken Hill. Yes, all 12 of them were there on the day. It was a great day, but also I've been to lots of other places as well, sometimes in a big room with 20 teachers from 20 different schools, and sometimes in a much smaller room with all the teachers from one school. That's what I've been doing. If you're interested in that, let me know. I can do that for your school as well. Strangely, even though I'm there to talk about year 7, 8, 9 and 10, we've had lots of conversations about year 11 and 12 and university. And it usually swings around to the way the universities are basically letting anybody into anything, with the exception of Sydney, who have the prerequisites, must get a band 4, 5 or 6 in advanced, or you won't be coming into one of their first year STEM undergraduate programs. And a lot of conversations about that, and a lot of conversations about the number of students who start year 11 advanced and then leave. And this is much more frequent and common than I actually thought. So I decided to put out a survey. I sent out 200 emails to 200 large-ish comprehensive high schools, and 50-50 metropolitan and regional, across all the sectors, and I quickly got 77 responses. And there it is. If you ignore students who've accelerated and you ignore students who are also doing Extension 1, this year, 2023, how many students started Year 11 Advanced at your school, and then 6 months later, how many of them are no longer doing Advanced? In other words, we're after the dropout rate. Yeah, 77 responses. So that's a decent sample size. I think there's approximately 800 schools in New South Wales which have Year 11 students. Anyhow, worse than I thought. 2,131 students started Year 11 Advanced. 6 months later, 35% of them are gone. And while I was in the room talking to teachers, I quizzed them. Why do they leave? Why does this happen? What is the problem with Year 11 Advanced? And it came down to this. Do they leave Year 11 Advanced in the first 6 months because those topics they meet for the first time, like calculus, are too difficult for the students? Or do they not bring prior learning from Year 9 and 10? Or do they lack motivation and work ethic? Well, I'm here to tell you that nobody chose A. In fact, some people said calculus is not a problem. They don't even make it. The students we're talking about don't even make it to calculus. They're gone before we start calculus. And if they do make it to calculus, well, you know what? Any fool can bring a power down the front and reduce the power by 1. But the trouble is they can't manipulate the expression prior to doing that and after doing that to provide the answer that we would be hoping for. Basically, everybody said it was about the prior learning from Year 9 and 10, but also motivation and work ethic is a major concern as well. But in publishing books for 7, 8, 9 and 10, I am particularly interested in answer B. Yep. So, what prior learning do they not bring with them? I quizzed everybody about this, and the answer is basically on your screen. It's the algebra, algebraic fractions, factorizing quadratic trinomials, working with indices and surds, logarithms. Some people said they don't need logarithms before year 11. Some people said they do. That one divided the room. But certainly equations, quadratic equations and simultaneous equations, working with linear relationships, working with the 5 non-linear relationships, which are specifically mentioned in their graphs. And we had some good conversations about function notation, domain and range, and transformations of graphs. Nobody mentions statistics or probability. Some people said trigonometry, fair enough, but nobody said statistics and probability. In fact, one person said, if I had a student in my year 11 advanced class who had never done statistics and probability in 7, 8, 9, 10, but their algebra skills were good, have a seat. Welcome to year 11 advanced. It's all about the algebra skills. So what I've been doing lately while working on the textbooks, and I will make these documents available, I've created a spreadsheet for every book. And in those spreadsheets for the year 9 and 10 books, it clearly illuminates for every exercise, it illuminates what we are doing in terms of syllabus content. So the sections which address core concepts in that beigey kind of colour, and the pink sections which address path topics. And this is fairly typical of a chapter in our books. We don't have chapters for the core and chapters for the path. That, in my opinion, that is not the right thing to do by the students. We have chapters which progress along the continuum from let's consolidate some stage 4 work and then work our way through a core topic and then progress into some path work. I'd like to talk about Jess and Max. These are 2 hypothetical people. I'm pretty confident you know some Jesses and Maxes. These are the ones who look at you halfway through year 10 at some point, maybe even in year 9 or year 10, or maybe they're in year 11 advanced already and they are wondering what is the best option for them. Should they be doing advanced in year 11 and should they be doing standard? And one of my favourite answers to that question is, well, it kind of depends on what you want to do at university and for the rest of your life. But in my experience, the vast majority of the Jesses and the Maxes of the world actually have no idea what they want to do at university and for the rest of their life. And so therefore, the best answer is you should keep your options open for as long as possible. By the way, I chose these 2 diagrams because one of them seems to like cubic curves and the other one likes parabolas. Yeah, there you go. So I'm sure you can visualize some Jesses and Maxes that you've had. And we might have the conversation about Sydney Uni that if you do advanced and you get a band 4, 5 or 6, then all of the STEM undergraduate programs at Sydney University are still open to you. Other unis will let you in. If you change to standard, other universities will let you in, but the statistics are quite horrific about the failure rate of students at those universities who are permitted into those degrees underqualified, having done standard in year 11 and 12. So what can we do? Because Jess and Max, the Jesses and Maxes of the world, it's not feasible that they would do everything in our big, thick year 9 and 10 book that contains absolutely everything in the core and the paths. That's just not feasible for Jess and Max. And my advice to schools is that we need to do the right thing by Jess and Max by prioritising certain topics above all others and putting those topics at the start of terms when you're feeling better and the students are feeling a bit rested, and making sure that those topics get the treatment that they deserve. And of course, once again, I'm talking about all the algebra topics plus some trigonometry. They seem to be the ones. 15 years ago, I would have said, of course, Jess and Max need to be good with geometry as well, Euclidean geometry. Well, those days are over, and I don't think the new stage 6 syllabuses starting in 2026 now, I don't think we're going to see geometry coming back the way it used to be. So the task of preparing Jess and Max for year 11 advanced actually, I think, has been lightened a little bit, because we can they don't need to be experts at proving that two triangles are similar or congruent, or then solving some tricky problem where you need to find some unknown angle and then write out all the reasons in a coherent fashion. Not anymore. Anyhow, so let's say Jess and Max are working from our year 10 book that contains all of the core and all of the advanced path topics and all of the extension path topics. I wonder how many of those sections, there's approximately 120 exercises in that book. It is a hefty book, and it takes a special kind of student to get through all of that before the end of year 10. Some schools manage that. I don't know how they do it, to be honest. But anyhow, I wonder, have you thought about what is the minimum? What is the minimum that Jess and Max could do in year 10 from that book and still be ready for year 11 advanced? Now, I'm not saying ideal, I'm saying minimum. Yeah, and today, after much deliberation, I counted them up. How many exercises out of approximately 120 do they absolutely positively need before the end of year 10? And the answer is 55. Minimum, 55. So year 10, 4 terms, approximately, I don't know, 175 days of school in year 10 by the time you take out all the excursions, exam blocks, camps, etc., etc. Let's say 150 days to do 55 exercises. Look, my feeling is that over the years, we've been given the freedom to do the right thing by Jess and Max, but we actually have not embraced that freedom. And I think a lot of Jesses and Maxes have therefore left the room and gone to year 11 standard. And that is a bigger decision that Jess and Max actually realise, in my opinion. And if they then decide that they want to pursue some sort of STEM career, from that moment on, it is a bumpy pathway. So based on everything I've seen and heard and discussed in the last 6 months, I'm very committed to encouraging schools to give students the opportunity to work from our more challenging book in year 10 rather than our easier book in year 10. And Christine, who will talk shortly, has come up with a deal that if Jess or Max are using that book electronically and they have the code for that book, so they're using the electronic online interactive version of the book, and then eventually it's no longer feasible to do that, it is possible for schools to contact Christine or anybody from the sales team, and they will switch the code. The code will switch, I should say. The code will switch from access to the advanced book into access for the simpler book, which contains the core and the standard paths only. I'd have to say, you know, Jess and Max heading towards standard, I don't think it's going to hurt them if they've done a little bit too much algebra. I don't think anybody has been severely affected by doing too much algebra and then going to standard. And there's one more thing I should have said about the standard book. If a student uses our year 9 and 10 core plus standard paths, and they did all of it, which is actually quite doable, they've already done half of year 11 and 12 standard. Yes. So I really think Jess and Max should have a crack at something more challenging for as long as they possibly can. And I'm really encouraging students, teachers from schools to set up their scope and sequence, to set up their scope and sequence in such a way that the likes of Jess and Max will stay on the pathway to year 11 advanced for longer rather than shorter. Give them a chance. Give them a chance to prove that they are capable of doing year 11 advanced. That doesn't mean they need to do absolutely everything in this book. That would be a special student heading towards extension. But, you know, by the beginning of year 10, we probably should know who is heading towards extension and who is heading towards advanced. And the likes of Jess and Max, they have made a decision to say advanced, not extension. Then we really should focus on the sections of the book which are most useful for those students. Right. I'm now going to hand over to Scott, who will talk about something new. Go ahead, Scott.
Thanks, Stuart. I'll just say a couple of things about the previous slide, perhaps. One is that it would have been good for our audience to see you create Jess and Max using Desmos live on air using the various graphing tools.
Thank you, Scott.
Maybe next time.
Next time.
The other thing I wanted to say was that the paths, a student's journey towards stage 6 mathematics, whatever the student's goal is, one of the ways that we try to help with that in this series is by the labeling of sections, not just in the stage 5 books, but starting back in year 7. So the sections there's not time really to get into all of the features of the books, and in this particular webinar that's been covered previously, and we'll be going through that at the Mansell conference and in other formats. But just to say that if you take a look at the tables of contents of all of the books, starting from year 7, the lessons in each chapter are labeled to assist students on their path all up to stage 5 and then into stage 6. If they are a student that has shown promise and is strong in their maths, then the sections that are labeled as extension, even back in year 7, would be good to do with them so that when they get to stage 5, they are better prepared for the topics that Stuart was mentioning, in particular algebra, and that will put them in good stead for advanced and extension topics in stage 5, and then the advanced and extension courses in stage 6. If a student doesn't fit into that category, there are sections that are labelled as consolidating, where the priority is about revising stage 3 content. And the aim is to get through the core material as well as fill any gaps, as many as you can, and then have another discussion when students are getting towards stage 5. So if you take a look at the tables of contents, that is something that you'll see, and it is there to assist with course planning going back to year 7 and 8. All right, anything you want to add to that, Stuart, before we crack on with the diagnostics tool?
No.
Okay.
Good.
All right, there are a couple of questions that have come in from the audience, but we'll get to those a little bit later. So this is something that we are doing for this particular edition that we haven't done before. It is going to be part of the online teaching suite, so this is not an additional add-on product or add-on subscription. It will appear within the online teaching suite within other features that if you're a Cambridge user, you'll be familiar with. Maybe we'll go to the next slide, Stuart. And these are some of the reasons why we wanted to do something like this now. As the person who looks after the mathematics list at Cambridge, I have been sent a lot of, for want of a better term, homemade diagnostic systems that are built out of Excel, that use Cambridge questions and involve a lot of manual data entry. There was a spreadsheet that I was sent that had, as you can see there in that first dot point there, 16,920 cells relating to a single class. So that was an attempt to capture all the information that this particular head of maths wanted to capture in their diagnostic system using a spreadsheet. So there was an element of Cambridge, if you can do something that uses your content so that we don't have to do something like this, that would be much appreciated. There was a gap in our resources. There's a lot of other types of assessment questions that point towards formative assessment in particular. The test maker as well that can be used for multiple purposes, but we didn't have something that was dedicated to diagnostic assessment specifically. Cambridge is known for a set of features and strengths and a methodology that is, whether it's unique to Cambridge or not, it is certainly considered a strength of Cambridge. And there was an opportunity for us to make the most of that, one of those strengths being our authors, Stuart and the others who make up the authoring team. And finally, there was an opportunity in terms of time, just the way that the various syllabuses and curriculums lined up for us. There was the opportunity for the authors to put in work into this that in a way that we just hadn't previously. All right, next slide, please, Stuart. Now, you may be familiar with some of these complaints about other types of systems that attempt to do something like this. Some of them are very good, by the way, but whether this is your experience or something that you've trialed something in the past, if it's something that you've heard of, you may be familiar with complaints relating to students repeating content multiple times. So that the system is the thing that is deciding when a student moves forward rather than the teacher. You might be familiar with complaints relating to students being misdiagnosed, so to speak, with various weaknesses and assigned content that is too much below their level. Students being prevented from moving on when, by virtue of other evidence, you as a teacher moving around the room, knowing the student, you know that they're ready, but the system is not letting them move on. There may be promises relating to student growth, that they can go from down here up to here in a certain amount of time, and those expectations aren't being met. There may be something relating to the fact that a system is too much of a black box, that it's unclear how it works or why things are happening in the way that they are happening, because of the various algorithms and things that are going on in the background. It might be something relating to students expressing negative feelings about the scores that they are being presented with in relation to others. And it might be too rigid or prescriptive in how it works. And that, although the font is smaller there for that last dot point, it's not less important than the others. And in fact, it's one of the strengths in what we've built here, the flexibility that I'll talk about in a second. Next slide, please, Stuart. So last time I presented in a webinar, I covered some of these things. So I don't want to spend too much time on this, but there are some goals that we had when we were working on our diagnostic assessment tool. We certainly wanted to facilitate students being able to demonstrate both their attainment and their achievement. Attainment relating to where they are assessed at given their age based on external standards, and achievement meaning how far they've come based on a comparison just with their own progress. We just in terms of the goals of diagnostics, it really is teacher focused, and it's about providing the information that a teacher might need at the right time with recommendations for steps about how they could improve student outcomes. And finally, we wanted to be able to present data in very useful graphical forms, and we'll see some examples of that in a second. Next slide, please, Stuart. We also wanted to allow for the tool to demonstrate student strengths as well as the need areas that they may need improvement in. We wanted to make sure that the tool is not demotivating. As I said, this is a tool that really is intended for the teacher. We don't want to present students, especially at the lower end of the scale, so to speak, with just a whole heap of incorrect answers and things that they can't do. That's certainly not what we want to do, but we also wanted to facilitate the ability for students to have opportunities to take ownership of their own learning. And again, I'll speak about that a little bit later as well. There's also a priority about certain decisions being made at an administrator level so that there's consistency and fairness across the board when this is being used, and that there are ways that you can use data that comes out of this for your own purposes. Okay, next slide, please, Stuart. So these are some of this is sort of at the heart of how this works, and there's not going to be time really in this particular presentation to get too much into the details about this, and this is something that you can discuss with your reps. There'll be how-to videos and opportunities to learn more about the details, but this is the core. What we've done is the questions are written around what we describe to be mathematical skills, which we feel are the smallest, most useful units that can be measured against. And there is a correlation between these mathematical skills and the worked examples in the textbook. And you can, even just by thinking about that for a few moments, you can see why we may have arrived at that. So each mathematical skill has 5 questions connected to it, 2 easy, 2 medium, 1 hard. You can build your diagnostic tests using either going through the syllabus and its outcomes and building tests in that way, so that if you're covering the syllabus in a particular way, you can do it that way. Or if you're using the textbook as the main driver of your teaching, you can do it that way. So whatever chapter you're up to, whatever section you're up to, whatever you want to cover in a particular unit of work as you define it, you'll be able to do it like that. And the diagram there is showing that these mathematical skills are common to both, meaning that if you're building tests out of the syllabus view, you'll have data that is reflected against the progress throughout the textbook, and vice versa. If you're building out of the textbook view, you'll see data that is reflected against the syllabus outcomes. Okay, next slide, please, Stuart. So this is the gist of how the questions work within this tool. There are two banks. One is intended for all of the testing that happens throughout a unit of work. So from the start up to the end, however you define that unit of work, whether it's half a chapter or a whole chapter or a chapter and a half, whatever it is, and it allows for any number of tests to happen throughout. So if you are a school who is doing diagnostic testing and you feel that the best way to do that is to do a single post test at the start, do all of the other work, exercise work, other kinds of formative assessment, you get to the end and then you do a post test, you can do that with this system. That's sort of the simplest model. If you want to do a pre-test and then a mid-test, so a test in the middle of the topic, and then a post-test at the end, you can do that. If you want to do more regular testing, say with smaller tests at the end of every week or every fortnight, you will be able to do that as well. So questions that are during a unit of learning are out of one bank, and all the post-test questions come out of a second bank. The questions in the post-test bank are the twin questions of the questions in the first bank, which means that when you're doing a post-test, students are being tested on exactly the same content as they've seen throughout a unit of learning, but not the same questions. So they'll see twin questions, but not the identical questions, meaning that they won't be able to memorize the answers. All right, next slide. So there are different ideas like that. People have various opinions and ideas of what is the best way to do diagnostic testing. One of those ideas is about what is the best type of question and that is most suitable for the use of diagnostics. So, for example, are fluency-based questions just really the key thing, or is it important to have a couple of harder problem-solving questions? Or are problem-solving questions really the domain of other types of assessment, not really for diagnostic purposes? So there are varying opinions on that, and I've seen a range of models in place already that have multiple options. So the reason we have written a range of questions for every mathematical skill is so that you can choose what you want. So, for example, you can choose a mix of questions, almost like you're in your superannuation and you're having a chat with your fund manager and thinking about what kind of mix of assets you want in your super fund, something along those lines. So you can choose mostly easy and some medium questions. You can choose all medium questions. You can choose a balanced mix, so to speak, which is an even mix of easier, medium, and one harder question as well, or mostly harder and medium and harder. So there's a wizard that goes on in the background. We'll explain it will be explained how that works within the system. If you're interested, it relies on something called a balancing matrix to make sure that when you're using a wizard and you just want to get you want to automate the process just to choose questions from the wizard, the balancing matrix is something that tries to ensure that the best spread of questions happens across the skills or topics that you've selected, but we'll go into that another time. Next. So these are this is the gist of the steps about how this works. The first one is about creating tests. Again, the teacher is in control of this. You define the unit of work. You define how many questions are in the test and how many tests you want to do. The results, there'll be lots of different reports that relate to this. From the reports, you'll be able to see student strengths and weaknesses, and then you'll be able to group them in different ways and assign follow-up work. Next slide, please, Stuart. You'll be able to set a post-test after the learning happens to measure how students have gone after that, and you'll be able to measure growth as well in different ways. Okay, next. So here are the report types. There are two main ones, and then there are a suite of secondary reports. The main ones will be familiar to you. These resemble the old school spreadsheets of things that are used for this purpose. You'll be able to filter these reports in the way that you could an Excel spreadsheet, for example, to get a Goodman chart that you can then do various things with. You'll also be able to zoom in and out for varying levels of details, and you'll see students' scores average out depending on how broad your view is. So, for example, you can look at results at a mathematical skill level, which is quite granular, and then zoom out to see how they're going against the textbook lesson, say, then the textbook chapter, and so on and so forth, and the same in a syllabus view as well. And the averages will change based on those selections. Next slide, please, Stuart. Here are some of the other report types. These are oriented towards showing growth. So as I mentioned at the start, it's important not just to show student attainment, but also how far they've come on their own journey, and every student is different. So we wanted to make sure that students have the ability to show their own progress regardless of what their scores are in comparison to their peers. So these are various reports. You can see the gist of these. The one on the top left is about the difference between scores in a pre or mid test versus a post test on exactly the same topics. So, for example, you'll be able to filter and just show all of the students who are not showing any growth, for example, who are either flatlining or showing a decline, say, if that's something you want to look at. The one on the top right is about mathematical skills themselves, and you could order that, say, to show the ones that are either the strongest performing to the least, or the least well performing to the strongest, depending on what your intentions are. And there are class, school, and other kinds of averages there, shown by those grey diamonds. I won't get into the one in the bottom too much, but essentially this is a way of plotting attainment versus growth, so that, say a student who will be able to show, for example, low attainment but high growth, that says something. Or they might be able to show low attainment, high attainment but low growth, which could suggest that they're not being extended enough, say. Or if they're really flying, they might show high attainment and high growth. And if they are really in the red zone, so to speak, they might show low attainment and little to no growth, meaning they are probably in need of intervention, say. All right, next slide, please. So we're getting towards the end of this part of the presentation, but just to say a few more things about setting follow-up work. This was another priority for us with this tool. Here, in essence, is how this works. So as I mentioned at the start, the basis of the mathematical skills that this diagnostic tool is based on are the textbook worked examples. They aren't 100% correlated, but if we needed to break down a worked example more, we did so, but there's a very, very strong correlation. In the interactive textbook, which you may be familiar with, all the worked examples in the series have demonstration videos. Thirdly, and this is something you may have seen if your sales consultants have visited you at your school, or you've seen some of the brochures or other kinds of advertising relating to this new series, all of the worked examples have now you try questions, which are questions that are identical in form and intention to the worked example, directly after every single worked example. So a step in terms of the diagnostics is that when testing is happening, students will be showing weaknesses at specific mathematical skills. And what happens, therefore, is that students can be directed to the worked examples that relate to the questions that they got wrong in their diagnostic testing. They'll be able to watch demonstration videos of someone doing the questions that they didn't get right. They'll be able to try questions just like those questions with the Now You Try questions. And there will also be a link to their follow-up work, if you choose to put this in, the exercise questions that are exactly like the questions that they got wrong, for even more homework, as an attempt for them to put in a little bit of work before the post-test, say. So these are all options. They're optional. The teacher is in charge of setting as much or as little of this as you want. But this is some of how all this works. Okay, just finishing up now. So just to say that the question content has been written by the authors. This is not some add-on thing where two people who or groups of people who don't speak to each other have put this together. This is the same people. It has the same philosophy as the textbooks. As I've mentioned a few times, that the teacher is really always in control. You decide what the unit of testing is going to be. You decide whether you're just going to do a pre-test and a post-test, or pre and mid and a post-test, or multiple topic tests. The teacher decides all of those in conjunction with their faculty. This is not a paid for extra or an additional subscription. This is something that will be present in the online teaching suite as part of this new edition. Whatever teaching program you have, if it's something you're building right now, or you already have something that you know works, this will fit into that. Doesn't matter which order you do things in. I mean, obviously you'll do things in an order that makes sense, but this tool can be used within whatever program you already have. The system itself is not dictating what you should be doing first or second, etc. And finally, it really, the textbooks are the main resource for delivering this new syllabus, if this is something that you choose to go with in terms of adopting Cambridge. But this tool, as hopefully has been evident, we feel will help you get more out of the resources than you have before, both you as teachers and as a faculty, along with your students. Okay, that really covers everything relating to the diagnostics. Christine, you have some slides that you want to go through, and then...
No, these are mine.
Oh, okay, Stuart, I'm sorry, I've jumped...
And Scott, there are no diamonds in the New South Wales mathematics syllabus, man.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Rhombuses, come on, get with the program. They are rhombuses.
All right, I was speaking...
Sorry, everybody, he's from Melbourne.
That's true.
They do things differently down there. Anyhow, yes, if you have seen one of these webinars before, I apologise in advance now that you are going to see some slides that you have seen before. I'm going to talk about some of the new features that we have included in this new edition, and also some of the things you may not have noticed before. So we decided that at the beginning of every section, 2A, 2B, 2C, we call them sections, that we would include learning intentions. Some people are required to use those at school, so we're making that job easier for you. And also, it's especially useful in stage 5. We have this new thing called past, present, and future learning, where we indicate what came prior, what is going to happen now, and what would happen next. So in the case of stage 5, I'll flick forward to, this one is from a stage 5 book. It tells you that in this particular section and this exercise, we're going to be working from one of the core topics called Financial Mathematics A. And we also indicate that this is not the last chance. They will have another crack at this in a corresponding section in the Year 10 book. And then also, if they move on to Year 11 standard, there's an indicator that this will be done again, or in the case of many of the path topics to advanced, there is something of a warning that this will become assumed knowledge in Year 11 advanced. At the beginning of our exercises, we used to have a section about understanding. We've decided to move that section out of there. So now it goes key ideas, building understanding, examples, and then the exercise begins with questions that are very similar to the examples. Some people said that the beginning of the exercise was too different from the examples. So we have addressed that feedback. Thank you very much. Scott mentioned this. I'll say it again in case you missed it, because lots of people have missed this one. Absolutely every example in every book has a video demonstration. We did this. This was not present in the first edition. This came in the second edition, but approximately 50% of the people who come to my workshops don't know that this is a thing. So there it is. Plus, Scott mentioned that now every example is immediately followed by something called Now You Try, an example that is almost identical to the worked example, so that students have a chance to do something very, very similar to what the teacher has just demonstrated. Some people have been unfamiliar with our working program. A lot of people have asked me, what are these strange looking numbers which appear during the exercises? These are either 2 or 3 sets of questions according to difficulty. So in our mainstream and our advanced books, there would be 3 sets of questions: an easy set, a middle set, and a harder set. We now have a progress quiz halfway through each chapter. We didn't have that before. We do now, and every question in the progress quiz is related back to the exercise from which it came. We have some sections called applications and problem solving and working mathematically. We take working mathematically seriously. We also know that some schools like to set for their students investigative style assignments. These would be excellent inspiration for investigative style assignments in years 7, 8, 9, and 10. Many of these working mathematically activities finish up with write a report, blah, 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 blah. Problems and challenges, we've had those before. They're still present, of course. And our very popular mind maps at the end of each chapter, we're still doing that, of course. And this one, people, when I show people this one in the room, sometimes they clap. The chapter checklist with success criteria at the end of every chapter. And as you can see, it's a downloadable PDF that students could print and have in their book, either at the start of the topic or at the end of the topic, so that they can actually track their progress through the topic and prepare for an assessment task which follows. And our chapter reviews at the end of the chapter are still present also, with short answer questions, multiple choice questions, and some extended response questions. And again, every question relates back to the exercise from which it came. Right. Is this the time for questions? The next slide is Christine's. So we do questions before that? What happens next?
I think we'll look at some questions.
Yep.
Scott, what do you think?
Yeah, we'll get to a few questions. Okay, so there's just going back to a question that someone asked towards the start of the presentation, Stuart. Maybe you could say a few words about the conversations that may need to happen with students who, and their parents who may believe that they should be doing advanced in year 11, but there may be wiser options. I'll just read Andrew's question basically, because I'm bastardizing it, not to swear on during the webinar. I would have thought the main reason students drop maths advanced in year 11 is because they shouldn't have been there in the first place, i.e. they were choosing a course beyond their ability level. This is a theme certainly of yours recently.
Okay, so you might look at me and say, but Stuart, you've been out of schools for too long now. Well, not true. I actually I actually did some work for a brand new school in Sydney, Inner Sydney High School. I was there 1 or 2 days a week. Brand new school. They started with year 7 in 2020, not the ideal year to start a new school with COVID and all. And then year 8 in 7 and 8 in 2021. I jumped in and said to the principal and head teacher maths science, we really should talk to the parents and the students about year 11 and 12 now, halfway through year 8. It's too late to have that conversation halfway through year 10. The conversation is way too important for that. Let's have a conversation with the parents and the students now and continue to have that conversation. And we developed 3 pathways for year 9 and 10. And we, like I suggested with the 55 sections, we believe that the vast majority of the students should at least try some of the more challenging work in stage 5 before the decision is made to exclude them from year 11 advanced. And coming back to your question about students choosing it even though they're not capable of it, I think what has happened a lot in the past is that some students have been excluded too soon without having a crack at some of those more challenging topics. And some students have been force-fed too much of the 5.3 work, too much, too fast, and therefore fallen in a heap. I think this is the ideal opportunity to start the conversation with year 8 and continue that conversation through year 9 and year 10. And students who are clearly not cut out for extension 1, but may be capable of doing advanced, should be fed, not force-fed too much, but the right amount of the right topics at the right time with encouragement. And just yesterday, I went to visit a head teacher in a school because she believes, and I trust her, I know this head teacher very, very well, she believes what they have done has stopped the fallout during year 11 advanced. This time around, almost nobody dropped year 11 advanced in the first 6 months because they basically did what I'm suggesting now. They identified the main things that those year 11 advanced students need, and they concentrate on doing those things really, really well, especially in the second half of year 10, where she basically describes it as the year 11 advanced algebra boot camp in the second half of year 10, where they didn't do polynomials, they didn't do logarithms, they didn't do geometry, they really focused on the algebra that they actually need. Now, this new syllabus gives us the freedom to do that. And sure, some students are not cut out for advanced either, but I think they at least deserve a chance to prove that we are wrong. Having said that, at the school I was working at, in the consultancy, the brand new school, there were some students at the end of year 8, some of whom had diagnosed learning disabilities, who were, with consultation with parents, were placed onto a numeracy pathway through year 9 and 10. But that was done with consent, with discussion, with consent, with a letter signed by parents. And at the end of year 8, apart from those students, at the end of year 8, nobody was excluded from doing advanced at the end of year 8, which has basically been happening for decades. Going back to when we used to have the 3 courses, advanced, intermediate, standard. In my experience, I worked under that system from 1986 through to 2004, almost 20 years. I met one student who progressed from intermediate to Year 11 2-unit calculus course. One of them out of hundreds. And other people have told me exactly the same thing. So basically, we were writing them off at the end of Year 8. I think we can do something a bit better than that under this system.
Do we have time for one more question, say, Christine?
Yes, I think so. Definitely.
Okay. What are your thoughts, Stuart, on the new Casio model? What is the model name?
8200.
Exactly right. Right. So
yes.
someone asked if you had any thoughts on that model and its capabilities. For example,
yes,
its power to do surds. No pun intended.
Yes.
Tables.
Well,
example.
I will come back to my friends Jess and Max. I think part of the reason that Jess and Max leave is going to be alleviated to some extent by that calculator. You know, coming up with the exact value of sine 300. That should not be the thing that pushes Jess and Max out of advanced into standard, but there's a whole collection of things like that, which together are a major contributing factor into Jess and Max leaving the room. I mean, I wish that calculator would factorize quadratic trinomials, because that's another hurdle that Jess and Max have trouble with, and their cousins in Victoria can pump that into their CAS calculator and get the answer, and then move on to the real business of learning mathematics rather than getting hung up in trivialities, shall we say. On the other hand, some people are saying, and maybe there is an element to this as well, that the introduction of that calculator will mean that some of the really quite easy to achieve marks come HSC time won't be there anymore, because why would you ask somebody to do that when the calculator does it? Who knows? Wait and see, I guess, on that one. But yes, I don't think that calculator is our best and brightest students. You know, they probably don't need all that functionality, but the Jesses and Maxes of the world, maybe that will keep them in the game for a bit longer.
Yep. So that really covers a lot of the questions that have been asked. There are other questions, Stuart, that Christine and I have answered directly in the chat.
Excellent.
Raf asked, what is the best way to assign the diagnostic tests to students? Does it possibly link straight to Google Classroom and Microsoft Teams? The answer is not directly, Raf. It's best to assign all of that within the system itself. It's very straightforward, similar to other functionality within the current system, but we've really worked hard to make all of that as easy as possible. But I can't remember how much I mentioned of this before, but one of the priorities was the ability to export all of the data that you could want from this based on the reporting that happens, so that you can then do things with it that you want to do in a different way, or want to present in a different way, or put into whatever system that you have. And then that's basically it for the questions, Christine.
Now, we've just got the slide up for the pricing. You would have received brochures with this pricing inside. Please contact your booksellers, because this is the RRP price. We give our booksellers a very good discount, and we expect them to pass it on to you guys. So, or you can ask us, one of the team, to get you some quotes. We'll just go to the next slide, Stuart. Okay, availability is always the next question. Year 7 should be available in October, and next week we'll be receiving close to 300 page proofs of this book, but there is a link to our online page proofs, which are available for Year 7. Year 8 will be available in November. The Year 9 core and standard paths, and also the advanced and extension paths, the online proofs are not yet available, but they're nearly with us. So come and visit the stand at Mansoir, and we'll have some there, I'm sure, and we'll be visiting you in schools with those. And then December for our Year 10 and October for the advanced and extension paths for Year 10. Okay, Stuart, the next one. So all the team are on the call today, and just take a snapshot of this if you don't know who is your rep in your area. And they're happy to come out. We're out in schools every day at the moment. We're so busy doing presentations and demonstrations. So just quickly now, I'd like to thank you all for attending the webinar today, and thank Stuart and Scott for their presentations. And also the webinar has been recorded, and this will be distributed to all the registered participants. But this does come out a couple of days later, so you'll receive this email shortly. So thanks again, everyone, and please do not hesitate to contact your Cambridge consultant for an in-school demonstration or appointment, or even to discuss pricing. Thanks again, Stuart and Scott. Is there any other questions that we need to address, Scott?
No, I'm just typing out one as we wrap up, but I'll get to that in a second. But that's really it. Just in relation to the diagnostics, that it's a fairly comprehensive tool, as you saw. So there are questions that specifically relate to that. You can just contact your rep, and they can come to me, and we'll answer those if there's anything in particular you're interested in or want to know about. There's a question, for example, about whether the test can be printed or not. So questions relating to that you can put to your rep or directly to myself.
Thanks. That's great, Scott. Thank you all again for attending today.